Welcome to the Developmental, a podcast about the messy, beautiful ways grown-ups grow up. Here, we explore turning the science into the day-to-day practice of adult development in teams, homes, organizations, and life. Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Developmental. And another very special conversation with a person who has been lately a big source of inspiration and learning for me, and whom I'm extremely excited for you to meet. Donna Trebilcock is an ICF certified executive organizational and systems coach, specializing in leadership and team development through a vertical adult developmental lens. Donna supports leaders and teams to grow in complexity, strengthen relationships, and navigate meaningful change, especially in progressive, self-managing, or values-led organizations. She has deep experience coaching individuals and teams at all levels and brings a grounded developmental approach to building high-performing and purpose-driven cultures. Her practice is shaped by ongoing professional development and her lived experience in complex adaptive organizational systems. Donna is passionate about the real work of leadership, about cultivating the inner capacity to lead amidst uncertainty, to build trust and grow collective intelligence. And she puts that wisdom and experience to work in her role as an enabling leader, coaching and organizational development at Chorus. Chorus is an outstanding organization who has boldly been challenging norms and breaking boundaries, showing that it is possible to organize and lead in a completely different way. And I can't wait for you to learn their story and the work that they are doing to create a completely different kind of workplace, one for the future and one that is adaptable and able to thrive in a complex and very disrupted world. I'm excited to introduce you to Donna, so I'll just step out of the way, and here is our conversation. So excited to have you, Donna. Thank you. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for asking me. I'm excited to be here too.
I came back from our workshop last week and I wrote a post on LinkedIn sharing just how incredibly excited I was to discover the work you're doing at Chorus, how you're pushing the boundaries and how incredibly passion-driven and purpose-driven your leaders are. It's so rare to find all of these qualities in the same place. So I just absolutely felt like I had to pick your brain, and there's so much we can all learn from what you guys are experimenting with.
Oh, thanks, Alice. Yeah, it's exciting times for us at the moment. And when you asked me to do this, I said to you, I'm not even sure if this is going to be interesting enough for people. But I think when you look under the hood, there's so much going on, and it's such a not a typical approach for many organizations at the moment. Hopefully, there's something valuable in there.
Oh, for sure there is. And I feel sometimes with the learning and development, it's a bit like it is with coaching, that we do the work in our own little bubbles. And we may talk about the work we're doing, but it's actually very rare to gain access into, as you say, under the hood, the inside story of what is actually happening when people are experimenting with different approaches. And what does that even look like? And what does the messy, real story of developmental work look like? And most of the people who listen to the developmental, they are us, our bubble of learning and development experts or consultants, coaches, facilitators, HR, people who are trying to the best of their abilities to facilitate the growth and the learning of others. And it gets lonely, I think, quite often.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's something to be said about the real stories of how this work actually unfolds, and also how they connect with the real stories of the people doing this work, which is why I'd love to start by asking you to share a bit of how you got into learning and development. What drew you to this space? And obviously, what drew you to adult vertical development? I know you share a passion for this lens.
I found myself working a number of years ago in a senior management role in a large, complex organization. And at the time, I was performing really well. I was exceeding expectations. And I really noticed this gave me a sense of, wow, I feel truly valuable in this role. And this was in part due to the size and the scale of the organization. And I felt that probably more so than I ever had before in my career. The better I did, the more teams I was tasked with managing, and there were project teams who'd been funded to deliver on discrete outcomes, as well as operational teams who had ongoing deliverables. And then these regular restructures took place. And one day there was a fairly important operational team that was effectively disbanded. And the manager of that team was made redundant. And the director came to me this day and tapped me on the shoulder and told me I'd now inherited this team as well as all the others that I already had within my remit. And I remember at this morning tea farewell to the disbanded team, this poor outgoing manager, I really felt for her, who'd been really passionate about the work that she was doing. And she'd done such a great job. She came up to me, knowing that I'd now be assuming responsibility for some of the work that she used to deliver, looked me dead in the eye, a few inches from my face, very directly told me, "You will fail. There is absolutely no way that one person can look after that many responsibilities. You will 100% fail."
Wow.
And yeah, it was a lot at that time. I really didn't know how to process that. And so I think part of her commitment, part of what she was saying was expressing her hurt in losing her role, obviously. And she just needed someone to direct that towards. And part of it was also just a really pragmatic statement about the volume of work that one person could be physically capable of managing. And of course, with what I know about vertical development now, I can see clearly what developmental stage was talking there, and also what stage I was in as I was receiving that comment as well.
Uh, how was
So
it for
yeah,
you to hear that at that time?
yeah, I was shaken, I think, and the seeds of doubt were definitely planted. And so my response to that really was to double down or triple down. So I committed to working even harder. I took on more, I delivered more, I continued to exceed expectations because I wanted to prove her wrong. I wanted to show her I could do it. And I did do it. And I remember even one day I received a standing ovation from an executive committee. I was doing a status update. Everyone stood and gave me a clap because I was delivering so far ahead. So I was getting all of this feedback to say, "You're doing good. Keep on that path."
Yeah.
Mm, More recognition, more responsibility, more opportunities. That's what it was all in service of. And then in terms of like next, I gradually became more and more unwell, to put it mildly. I was barely sleeping. Some mornings I'd be driving to work, wondering if it was even safe for me to be behind the wheel. I'd regularly wake up at 3:30 in the morning and start smashing out a few emails to get ahead or catch up from the previous day. So most days were typically 8 to 9 hours of back-to-back meetings. And at the end of all of that, I'd return to my desk really exhausted. And then I'd say, okay, now it's time to start the real work. Everyone else has left for the day. So yeah, I was really unwell and I was really quite burnt out at that point. And I'm a fairly reflective person as well as, and I started to realize if I didn't change personally, then I was pretty much going to send myself to an early grave, the trajectory that I was on. It wasn't sustainable. So I started to explore new ways of working, ways that would require me to hand over much of what I thought had been my responsibility over to my teams and working in a way, I suppose, that empowered them to make the work visible and make decisions that they were well capable of making on their own. And to start experimenting and figuring out what works and what can be learned as well along the way. And so I started to realize that my value wasn't in being the person that made every decision, attended every meeting, knew every role inside out. My role was actually to empower others, to remove those roadblocks, and I guess just to facilitate that co creation of new ideas and solution. So that was really quite a big turning moment for me.
Do you feel this resonates on so many levels, both with my own experience and with that of so many of my corporate clients who reach this point of having ticked all the boxes and gotten all the accolades, and then almost your body just decides for you that you cannot continue in the same way.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm curious in your lived experience, because I know you've reflected a lot on this and unpacked it in many ways. How was that change impacting the way you understand yourself, your identity,
Hmm.
motivations? Because what I'm seeing, and I was actually having this last week conversation with the team that I was working with, where they were coming to this realization that the reason they are stuck in operational and only aspiring to this eternal debate between we need to be more strategic and spend time reflecting, but in fact we're in the thick of it all day long and working 14-hour days. And one of the leaders said, I realize we're actually addicted to this type of way of
Hmm.
working, despite knowing we need to change or saying we want to change. We keep on doing what we've always done because we are actually terrified of what it means for our identity to slow down, to be less useful, less involved in everything, less, yes, needed all the time. Who am I if I'm not all of that?
Oh,
So I'm
absolutely.
wondering, yeah, if there was any of this that you've experienced as well as you embarked on that
Yeah.
personal change.
So much, so much. And I think I'd had such a varied career up until that point and really doing a lot of just trying to figure out who I was in the world, figure out where my value was. And I really felt like I'd found it in this job. Suddenly I was important and I was delivering on really big projects that were impacting thousands of people. It felt like really good work to be a part of. So that really became my identity. This person who achieves, who does well, can manage multiple projects at once. Really was my identity at the time. And I started to do some work with a coach around that time. It was the first time I'd ever really worked with a coach. And it was really the first time someone held the mirror up and said, Donna, if you overplay a strength, it can become a liability. And that hit me like a brick wall. And I was just thinking, oh, how does this actually play out for me? How am I overplaying this strength of achieving? And how is that now actually holding me back from doing the very thing that I want to do, which is impact more people positively?
Yeah.
So that was really a point where I had to start questioning that identity for myself and starting to think, well, if I'm not that, who am I?
I know this is an ongoing, possibly lifelong kind of question, iterating on the answers to that. But where are you at with the answer to that question? What has shifted for you in the way you understand yourself? And how has that allowed you to take a different path professionally and get to doing what you're doing now?
I've reflected a lot on the adaptability that I have. And I told you that over the years, I'd had quite a varied career. And when I sat and thought about that, I thought, wow, I've delivered value in every role that I've had in my career in different ways. And I can actually start to be now intentional about where I spend my time and my energy. And that's not something I'd ever really felt that I could do for some reason up until that point. So it was really just working hard, waiting for somebody to come and tap me on the shoulder and say, Donna, we think you'd be great over here. So I started to shift away from that mindset and start to focus more on if I could choose wherever I wanted to be and whatever I wanted to do and the impact I wanted to have, what would that be? What would happen if I chose and I set the intention? And when I shifted into that mindset, so many things started to change for me. And that was about that time where I thought, yeah, actually, there's something in this coaching. I started to take more of a coaching approach with the teams that I worked with and was blown away by the results. When I get out of their way and just remove the roadblocks and help them get unstuck, they're amazing. They can go and achieve so many things, so much more than I could have as just one individual. So my purpose shifted in a really positive way. The productivity went up, the absenteeism went down, the KPIs all shifted in a positive direction, all because of that meaning change and that shift in mindset and approach. I was hooked and I was like, I need to go and learn this. I need to go and learn how to do this coaching formally, which triggered my very first ever coaching course. I've done a few since then, and I was absolutely hooked. And I just was filled with such a sense of purpose when I started to learn coaching that I was like, this is just going to be integral to whatever I do for the rest of my life. I don't want to brand myself as just one thing. So I don't want to say I'm a coach or I'm a manager or I'm a this or a that. This is really just something that's integral to wherever I spend my time and energy now going forward.
There was a light bulb moment I just had before when you were describing this shift in mindset and this almost intentionality that you were able to tap into. I remember how we kept talking, and we will talk in this conversation, obviously, about the deliberately developmental idea, what it means to be deliberately developmental, to build a deliberately developmental organization in Kagan and Leahy's concept. But it feels to me like you're describing a choice to become deliberately developmental in your own life
Yeah,
before
that's
you do
exactly.
anything for anyone else.
You've completely hit the nail on the head. Up until that point, there'd very much been a pattern of my fate, my future, my direction was in the hands of somebody else. And I just had to work hard enough and hope that the right people saw me and pointed me in a really good direction. And it was at that point when I started to reach absolute burnout levels and changed my mindset that I realized, hey, actually, I have a say here. I can completely choose where I place my intention, how I spend my time. Yes, it means I'm going to have to work to get towards that goal, but I can do this. And that's not something that had ever come easily for me in the past. But I started to see these little experiments. Okay, what happens when I put my intention here and experiment with the way that I work with the team? Oh, great things happen. So then I was getting feedback in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's if we think, and I know there are a lot of people who are listening to us who are familiar with the stages of development. And this sounds like such a beautiful case study of what this transition between that achiever stage where you're so driven by external goals and ambitions, and you shift into that more redefining stage where the inner locus of control becomes stronger and this sense that you have choice. And
Yes.
also some of the difficult questions arise around purpose and meaning and who you want to be. And maybe it also speaks to how messy and uncomfortable this transition is.
Yeah. It's definitely messy and uncomfortable. I think that I could romanticize that shift and say that it was one day a switch flipped and all of a sudden I had this different mindset and everything was rosy. But the reality of that is it's messy and I was questioning myself. I was questioning if I'm going to do things in a radically different way, this could all backfire. This could all blow up on me and negatively impact my reputation. What does this mean for me in the way that people view me in this very large organization where I was in roles where I was very visible to many people? It was a risk, but I feel like it was a calculated risk. And I just did it in bite sized chunks, those little experiments that you can do to just test things rather than going all in on day one and just
Yeah.
testing. And that's actually worked really well for me personally.
I hear a lot of questions from clients I work with around what this testing and experimenting looks like. And I'd love it if you'd want to elaborate on that a little bit. What does that look like for you? What's an example of when you say experimenting with something small? What's a small example that comes to mind? And the reason I'm asking this is because we're seeing actually a huge increase in leaders in organizations whose adult developmental stage veers towards that redefining space. And there's been a massive shift pre and post COVID in some of our psychometrics where we've seen shifts from maybe 15 to 20% leaders scoring at redefining to as now up to 40%, which we've seen actually in the leaders that we've tested in the projects we're doing together. Because so many are getting into that space, more and more are asking, okay, so how do I actually embody this way of thinking? What do those experiments look like? So that's the backdrop to my question. What do the experiments look like for you?
If I think back to that particular example, I realized that I was the person, had traditionally been the person who had to give the feedback. If somebody in the team was, say, upset with someone else's performance, they'd come to me They talk about it, and it felt like it was incumbent on me to go and solve the problem on behalf of that person. So when we started to make this shift, I thought, what would it be like if it was the team giving each other that feedback more directly?
Mm.
So I ran a little in one of our team meetings, I ran a little session around feedback and asking the team what would create a safe space for them to be able to give each other feedback. And we even did a little bit of practice on what that could sound like and look like, and invited the teams. Is this something that you'd be willing to experiment with and would be up for? So that invitation was there, and they accepted that invitation, and we started to just build it into our practice. So every week, somebody would take it in turns to facilitate the team meeting. And we just made it a part of our practice that at the end of that meeting, you would say something that that person did really well in the session and something that they could work on for next time. And it became such a normal part of our practices
Yeah.
that became really safe, and people looked forward to it, getting that feedback. And all of a sudden that took that accountability away from me. I no longer had to be the only person in the team that was able to give someone feedback.
That's such a great example. So then almost this leads to a shift in how power is distributed in the team as well, because it's one thing for the leader to have all the power to tell people you're doing good, you're not doing so good. And
Yeah,
it's a whole different thing for the team to share that accountability and basically hold each other accountable or support each other in their growth.
absolutely. Yeah, and that created some really positive shifts. I think people enjoyed feeling more empowered, even though we worked in a very traditional hierarchical way in this organization. All of a sudden, hey, I actually have some power and some say here, and this feels really good.
Yeah.
And even just seeing things like, I remember we had one member of the team who would somehow end up getting food poisoning about once every 1 to 2 weeks. And I say that jokingly. They didn't really have food poisoning. There was a lot of unplanned sick leave. And miraculously, that stopped overnight when we started taking this more empowered approach, because he really felt like I'm a genuine part of this team and I can contribute and I can have a say and I can say no to things that I don't feel comfortable with and come up with an alternative. And it's just a really different way for people to work who've never done that before in their lives.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. It's so good to see also the outcome, the very practical outcomes of these shifts, how people maybe feel like they don't have to run away
Yeah.
anymore
Yeah.
and they can lean into because they feel like they've got power, they've got a word to say.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So from that journey, from that personal journey, I know it continues for you, but you're now in a role in a very, I would say, unusual organization in many ways. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how Chorus is unusual,
Yeah.
and what can be learned from this unusualness. And you're also facilitating this type of shift and growth for many other people. You're holding this space for others to go through a similar journey towards that redefining space and beyond.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd love to hear the story of that, of you and Chorus, and
Mm.
yes, the work you're doing here.
Yeah. So I think once I went off and I did that coach training and got really quite excited about doing work in that way, I was really lucky enough to come across this internal coaching role at this organization called Chorus. And I was really intrigued by the way that Chorus worked. So they came together through a merging of three different organizations in the community care space. And they said, hey, we're a flat self-managing, self-organizing structure. We don't have hierarchy. We don't have managers. We don't have job titles. We don't have position descriptions. And I was just really intrigued by this because I felt quite drawn to it in terms of some of the revelations that I'd started to have about this redistribution of power. I was lucky enough to be selected to join their internal coaching team. And initially, the role was really a performance coach. So I would catch up with people regularly. Yes, we would have some more traditional coaching conversations, but at least 50% of it was looking at their dashboards, their KPIs, how are you tracking, what might be getting in the way, and coaching them in that way. And I really felt like this kind of just feels like a manager in a way without authority. And something still didn't really sit quite perfectly with me with that. And we started to evolve over the time. I've been there for about 3.5 years now. And over the next year or so, we started to evolve a little bit in the way that the coaching team operated and became more what I would call true coaching, less of the performance focus, more of the, hey, what's going on with you and what's the inner work that you might need to do to move further towards your goals. And became more and more involved in that type of work. And I noticed that we do invest at Chorus quite heavily in people's what you might call horizontal or technical development. So we send people on traineeships, diploma courses, all of the training that they might need to get up to speed. But for example, we might have noticed someone who was in a leadership role, a lead without any authority, no actual sort of power to make decisions or anything like that. And so these people were starting to struggle saying, how do I do this? How do I lead without authority? If I'm a lead, what am I actually leading if I don't get to call the shots?
Yeah.
So that was an interesting thing to help people navigate, and still is. And yeah, what I noticed was that you might send someone for a traineeship. They might learn, here are the 5 steps to having a crucial conversation with somebody. But then they'd bring it back to the office and realize, actually, I can't put this into practice because if I give somebody this feedback, they might not like me, or they might respond negatively, or they might think differently of me. And so then I started to realize, hey, there's something else going on here for people. And it really is everything that sits in that vertical space. All of these, what is this inner work that I need to do in terms of my mindsets and my beliefs and my behaviors and the position that I'm taking. And I could really connect that back to my own growth journey in my previous roles, where I went, oh, something's just not working for me here. I'm the one that needs to shift.
Yep.
So that was really the start of some thinking around, I think we need to really introduce this vertical development piece into Chorus, and what would happen if we did that in a really intentional way.
I love the almost mirror kind of quality of the experience that you've had. And I think it's really fascinating if you look at an organization like Chorus. And for those listening who have read Frederic Laloux's Reinventing Organizations and might have been like I was when I read that book, fascinated by the particular case study of an organization called Buurtzorg in the Netherlands. Chorus has a similar structure as Buurtzorg, right? So
Yeah.
you have tens of self-managing teams who work in the communities. And the
Yeah.
leads we're talking about here, they are leading those teams, but they are leading them as facilitators for the team rather than an official hierarchical role where people would report into them, which doesn't happen. So you almost created you really created a structure where you took away the power of leaders, the formal power, in a way forced them to find other ways of practicing power with their teams rather than over their teams. So the power over option is out.
It's out. Yeah.
Out.
Yeah. And that's so different for people to get their heads around, because when we think about it, almost, if not every role that we've ever held in our life has had some hierarchy attached to it. And even in our family systems, those dynamics are hierarchical. Our friendship groups, going through school, we've just been so exposed to hierarchy our whole lives. So to then take that away and say to someone, not only are you working in a way that's non-hierarchical, but for many of these leaders, they were first-time leaders as well. So these might be people who've come through a traditional support worker pathway, and then might be in their 50s or 60s, for example, and finding themselves being in a leadership role for the very first time in their lives. So these people are navigating a lot. There's a lot of moving parts there happening at once. So yeah, to help them to see the possibilities in working in this way. I'm thinking of one leader in particular who, and I absolutely love her to death, she really dug her heels in at the start of this transition. No, it's never going to work. This is terrible. Why can't someone just please tell us what to do? Which we used to by the light.
Yeah.
Somebody, And she's over the last couple of years, she's actually really grown to embrace this way of working. And she said now that this has had such a profound impact on her personally. And she can't imagine working in any other way now because she sees the benefits. She's had enough time to pass that she's been able to see, I can actually see firsthand how this impacts the team, how this impacts the organization. And it's so positive, and I don't want to work in any other way. So
Yeah.
we see lots and lots of stories like that at Chorus.
What would you say motivates people when they say, or what do you think people think about when they say, I see the benefits of how taking away this formality of power and also democratizing, because you've democratized all of your processes, right? You are co-creating rules of working together. You're co-creating boundaries. What happens if someone is not performing? So all of these things, traditional organizational structure, they are top down imposed. And
Yeah.
of course, you are discussing them with a whole, as a whole organization, and you're basically writing the playbook together.
Yeah, exactly. That's not just a metaphorical thing. We literally have a playbook at Chorus. We come together. The playbook is really our set of guidelines on the Chorus way of doing things. And anybody can write a play for the playbook. And the process is that you write down the process, what you think it needs to be. You bring it to a community of practice, you present it, everyone gives their feedback, and you make whatever necessary adjustments need to be made. And when everybody's happy with it, it gets published. And then that becomes the Chorus way that we do that particular thing.
Yeah.
So that's one example. We also have our accountability framework. So this was something that we worked on because in an organization like Chorus, when you have a problem and you don't have a manager in the traditional sense to go and complain to, for want of a better word, what do you do? So we've developed a framework where we make agreements with one another. So we have a process, a template for helping to guide teams through that agreement making process. We'll bring everybody together. We'll make sure that all voices are heard in that agreement making process. And we're really talking about things like what is the way that we want to show up for one another? So there's the social contract aspect of that. What's the kind of culture and atmosphere that we want to create for each other when we're working in a team together? Some logistical, practical things like practices. How often do we meet? Where do we meet? How do we conduct our meetings? How long do they go for? Those sorts of things. And then we talk about we're all human beings, and those agreements will get broken from time to time unintentionally. So when that happens, and we talk about when rather than if, how do we want to show up for each other then?
Yep.
And how do we want to be with each other when things get tough? And so we have that conversation and we go quite deep, and we do that at the inception of a team, ideally. For existing teams, we might do that retrospectively. But it's great. People come together, they feel more connected, they feel like they understand one another more and how to show up for one another. And then we have a process for if those agreements become broken, how do we manage those agreements from there? So things like that have started to shift the culture in terms of away from having a traditional manager, having those traditional hierarchical lines, and empowering people to hold that within the team and manage those things themselves.
I know you've done all of that with an overarching intention to really increase the positive impact that the organization can have in the communities that it is serving, but
Yeah.
also for the benefit and the well-being of the organization itself. When you say and you hear those stories of people having been part of that more traditional structure before this change happened and
Mm,
being part of this change and this new way of being and seeing the benefits of that, what
mm.
benefits are they seeing, and what benefits are you seeing as
Yeah,
well?
so more engaged teams, I think, first of all, is something that we hear regularly. The team loves it when we have these discussions and we come together and we figure things out themselves. Members of the team are more confident because they feel like they truly have a voice in the process. It's not just lip service where you can give some feedback, but then someone's going to come and overrule you. No, actually, the teams that are doing this well, they really embrace this. And they say, actually, the team doesn't like it. We won't take that direction. So this flows through the whole organization, by the way. We're a not for profit organization. We still have a board to report to. And I guess one of the challenges that we face is that our board still works in a traditional way. But in terms of our, what we call our strategic coaches, which in a traditional sense would be our CEO, CFO, CPO, etc., even with that group, they respect the ways of working and support that. So people can see that even from the CEO, this is actually how we work. This
Yeah.
is being modeled every single day. And so people feel more confident, more empowered. Great ideas are coming out that perhaps would have potentially been stifled in a traditional organization. So we have teams now starting to experiment with new ways of connecting with the community outside of a traditional structure, and it's just paying off in leaps and bounds.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know because life is messy that it's not all easy. And actually, working in this way comes with its own challenges. And one of the ones you were touching on before, and I'd love to dive a bit deeper into, is this idea that actually you need to foster the vertical growth of people within the organization so they can more comfortably operate in this kind of, we could call it a post-conventional structure of
Yeah.
all of the characteristics of those late stages of distributed power and empowerment and co-creation, and all of those things are embedded in the way you work, but that also requires people to almost step up into those types of ways of being and working. So you're in a unique position where you're needing to uplift the developmental capacity or support the developmental capacity of your people so they can thrive. This very future focused structure you've created.
We've started with focusing on our leaders first, not in a hierarchical sense, but we still see our leaders as people who are in a position of influence, even if not with power, but certainly with influence. And inviting people to have a window into what is vertical development. What does it mean to operate from a particular stage? And what's possible at each of those stages? What are the gifts that each stage brings? And starting to get some insights into what's the work that I can do. If I'm here and I want to be somewhere different, what is the work that I might need to start to lean into if I'd like to get there? Knowing that I can do that in a really supportive way within Chorus's structure. So, firstly, understanding how we show up as leaders, and then what we're starting to see already, even though it's just fairly early days in our leadership development program, we're starting to see this trickle effect where we have some non leaders that are starting to hear about some of this work and going, oh, that sounds quite interesting. Could I get in on that? Yeah, of course you can. So, I think eventually, and I say eventually, but I don't think this will actually be too far down the track. We'll have everybody in the organization having the ability to check in on their developmental stage, to understand that, and to start taking part in some deliberately developmental practices. One of the things that we'd like to set up quite soon is some little kind of growth labs, little learning pods, if you like, where we might have a diverse range of stages. And we'll be looking at some real adaptive challenges together, things that we're facing as an organization, things that everybody in the team experiences, and having those different perspectives coming in to help shape the solution to those problems. That's one of the ways in which we want to help reach everybody in the organization with this developmental work. And also thinking about how do we bring this into our recruitment practices even. So really looking at what are the different touch points where we can start bringing intentionality around deliberately developmental practice so that it just becomes part of the way that we do things around here rather than just a novel thing with a discrete timeline.
I'd love to zoom in on that a little bit because I know there are a lot of fans out there of Robert Kagan, Lisa Leahy's book, Deliberately Developmental Organization. And you are effectively, as an organization, aspiring to build that kind of culture. And I'm curious at the core, what does this mean for you? What does this whole idea of deliberately developmental look like?
It's giving people an opportunity to understand and support them with practical ways to experiment or apply developmental concepts. As I'm saying, you're really thinking about all those different touch points that we can we can weave that developmental practice through. So that could be everything from our organizational playbook, our onboarding process, our staff inductions. I'm thinking even staff exits, the whole employee experience, and the way that all of our working practices. So some of this we're already doing anyway by design. So we have, for example, once a month a meeting, which is traditionally a meeting of our leadership community. This is anybody who maybe formally holds a leadership accountability, but anybody can come to that session. So if we have anybody in the organization at all that just says, hey, that's a discussion I'd really like to be part of, we welcome them in. And the only caveat to that is that they have a conversation with their team about how they make that happen. Obviously, they might be stepping away from some operational duties for the day. So can somebody go and backfill them for a couple of hours so they can attend this meeting? But we regularly have people from all over the organization coming and contributing to these leadership conversations. That's just one example of many that we do within Chorus that has this kind of consensus-based decision making. So it's just one of the many ways that we invite people into these different types of practices and to have a voice.
When I think of deliberative developmental, I think of a living organism that is able to continue learning and growing on its own. And it sounds to me like you're doing this in two ways. One is you've created a structure where people are encouraged to contribute in so many ways and learn from other people systematically through just the very way the structure is built and the processes are built. And also you're bringing in this language of human development explicitly in the organization, inviting every person to look at themselves and their own individual growth journey and how it intersects with their work in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking that in terms of next steps for us as an organization, we're looking to create an environment where each of these local teams can be as independent as possible. So we're trying to set them up with the tools and the processes and the resources to be independent in terms of how they manage themselves, their budgets, how they spend their time and energy with our customers. In the other side of that, we also have our enabling function, which is traditionally that back of house. So think people and culture, finance, IT support, all of those types of things. So over time, we want to make that enabling function as small as possible to enable funds that are coming in to be redirected back to the locals and go back into community connection type activities, so that those teams really, to be able to do that successfully, need to be as independent as possible. So this is really the very messy work that we're in the middle of doing right now in terms of setting that up for future success.
What would you say is the hardest thing in doing this work, Donna? Because you are at the core of the team who is facilitating, supporting, getting in there and mediating conflict and coaching individuals and coaching teams. You're doing so much to create the container for all of this work.
Yeah.
What is the hardest thing for you in playing your role?
Yeah, good question. Look, people work is messy work inherently, right?
Yep.
We're messy creatures.
Yeah.
And I think if this was an organization where we had started from day one, where we had said, this is our intention, we'll only hire people who feel aligned to work in this way, and everyone's excited and on board, that would have been one thing. But the true reality is that Chorus in its current form came together through the merger of some different organizations. And some people have been with the organization for 10, 15 years in various capacities. And then all of a sudden, the tablecloth is yanked out and they're just like, and now you're self-organizing and you're a deliberately developmental organization, away you go. And that's really tough for some people. So I think over the last few years that I've been with Chorus, we've seen some people who initially were not aligned at all with that way of working and really dug their heels in and fought it, and have eventually come around and gone, actually, no, it's quite fantastic. We've had others that have said, you know what, this is just not for me, and they've stepped out. And we really do respect that, because it's not for everybody. It really isn't. And so just I think even just acknowledging that and not thinking that you have this magic solution to all of life's problems, because it's not for everybody. But what it has allowed is space for more people to come in, and just gradually over time, people starting to see the benefits, seeing actually there's something really quite exciting and different here. I'm recruiting in the process at the moment of recruiting another coach into the organization. And as I was interviewing people over the last week or so, I remember having a conversation with one learning and development professional, and she was so impressive. Like, she'd had this amazing career. She'd worked in the corporate space for years, doing some really impressive things. And when I started having a chat with her, it became quickly apparent, I think to both of us, that perhaps it wasn't a good fit in terms of what she was used to. And she actually had this moment in the interview where she said to me, "Wow, I've just realized that what you're doing there at Chorus is the complete opposite to everything that I've done in my whole career." And I said, "Wow, that's really fantastic that you're able to see that." And she said, "You know what? I don't think I'm the right person for this role, but I'm so interested. And where can I go and read more? And I think in the future, this is a place I'd like to work. Can't hit the ground running now, but my goodness, I want to learn about this." So yeah, the ripple effects of doing this work are quite profound, I think, in a way. So for all its messiness, and there is a lot of messiness, every day it feels like it's worth it. Yeah.
I know how deeply passionate you are in doing it. I'd love to ask you a question that is on my mind every time I see the gap between the talking the talk and the walking the walk in organizations. And I know it's something we've talked about before in other conversations, where you've got well-meaning leaders
Yes.
wanting to create positive change,
Yeah.
creating, in very few cases, it's to the extent of what happened at Chorus, but encouraging people to come up with ideas and talking about sharing power and doing all of that. But then people start to feel more empowered and they start to push back on stuff. And that's when I see a lot of leaders really stepping back from their positive intentions for change.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be confronted with the reality that your power is not as recognized or respected. So it's almost like I see these contradictory motivations in organizations. We want people to have a voice, but when they're using their voice to say stuff we don't like, we don't want it anymore. And then these mixed messages are coming through. So I'm curious how, and I've seen you working actively as a leadership team to really walk the talk of what you're actually building there. Yeah, I'd love to hear anything you'd like to share about that, about the how this can be confronting for the people leading the organization, how it can be so hard to truly be in that collaborative space as a senior leader.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And gosh, we're really faced with this right now. I think we have a whole bunch of strategic initiatives that we need to deliver on. And the reality is that the way that we were working previously, because we were working in such a distributed way, things weren't going necessarily quite as quickly as we wanted them to. And we've actually had to do a little bit of a temporary restructure within our leadership team or leadership group to really think, how do we reorganize around this work? And this might mean bringing some additional capacity in, people with different technical skills or just more people with the same skills to allow people to focus more where the focus needs to be. And this has actually been really quite, what's the word? I think just unnerving. I think for a lot of us, this has just felt like have we failed here because we weren't able to achieve these things in the way that we thought that we could? Was this just actually one big experiment? It's given us feedback that said maybe we need a few more people with some varying technical expertise to deliver on these initiatives in the short term. We're really having to look at things quite differently. We're really also having to look at ourselves as individuals and the way that we're showing up as leaders, but the way that we're holding the space and creating that container for everybody else in the organization. And it's felt messy. It's felt quite emotional for people at times. It's really challenged our growth edges, I think, for all of us. Look, I'm the eternal optimist, Alice, and I try to always look for the opportunity in a situation. And in amongst all of that messiness, I'm thinking, wow, what an incredible opportunity for developmental growth right there in front of us. This is a true adaptive challenge that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah.
So if we can actually use this as an opportunity to lean into and understand what's the growth here, how is our own developmental fallback playing into this, all of these things. I think sometimes I think about where we spend our energy. So in this way of working, we tend to spend a lot of our energy at the front of the process. So setting up those agreements, getting really clear on how we want to work with each other, how we want to be with one another, how we're going to approach problems when they come up. And whereas sometimes in a more traditional organization, the work gets executed and then little fires pop up along the way and you spend time dealing with the fires, someone's performance or things aren't tracking the way that you expected them to. And then that's not to say that those fires don't still pop up in this way of working, but I feel like we're much more adequately equipped to deal with it because we've had those tough conversations right at the front. And so when those issues do pop up, hey, we've already had this discussion about how to deal with this. So we're not having to figure that out in the moment. So sometimes it can feel like you're spending more time on something, but it's really just putting that effort in early to ensure a smoother rollout.
That is a really important point because there's always this objection of, oh, will it take too long? What I'm hearing you say is too long for what? So it is forcing you as a leadership team to really walk the talk of leaning into the discomfort yourselves first and foremost, as you
Oh,
help everyone else in the organization to do the same.
yeah, absolutely. I think just in the last week alone, we have people who are racing. We're coming up to a pretty major funding change in the industry, which has meant that we've had to change the way that we work quite quickly and put some changes in place quite rapidly. So we have a team of really amazing people at the moment on the ground working very hard to get that done. And in the middle of that, we've said, hey, let's come and do a developmental debrief. And on the surface, if you're someone who's in that achiever space, that's going to feel really unsettling because you think, oh, that's going to take me away from the work of achieving and getting this work done. But actually, the feedback that we've had from people so far is, gosh, that was actually so useful to just stop and think about how am I showing up in this situation? What's going on for me? Is there anything that I want to shift? And what are some steps that I might take to go towards those shifts? And so these are the things that our leaders are really right in the thick of right at this moment. And there's a huge developmental opportunity there for us.
That's amazing. And it's so touching and humbling for me to just witness these real life examples of leaders doing the counterintuitive thing when the pressure is high and you've got that urgent deadline to intentionally say, actually, this is the time to slow down and look at ourselves so we can choose how we run towards that deadline, that last mile before we have to achieve whatever it is that we want to achieve. I am
Yeah,
just beyond grateful to you for just so transparently and candidly sharing or inviting us into some of the beauty and the messiness of really doing developmental work. Because I think most of the time we hear the success story and the positives of the courageous organizations choosing to be the outlier, but we can learn so much more from the reality of this work is hard. It's
yeah.
beautiful, it's inspiring, but it's so hard and it can be stretching you personally and collectively in so many ways.
Absolutely. And despite all of that, I'm still sitting here with my optimist's rosy glasses on and saying this is absolutely worth it. And I know I'm not alone in saying that. I think we're still very much at that stage where we're committed to leaning into that messiness and all the wonderful gifts that brings
Yeah.
and seeing what can emerge from that. It's very exciting.
I would love to ask you as we bring this conversation to a close, Donna. I'm always striving in this podcast to leave people with something practical from the wisdom of the guests who choose to be with me in these conversations, in these candid conversations. Something that they can try, something that they can experiment with. And if you were to start over and benefit from the wisdom of someone like you, who's spent already years building and working towards a deliberately developmental culture and supporting people to really make development part of the way they live and are at work. What advice would you give yourself? What would you want the beginner you, let's say, to know that you could have used, to know, to try?
I think first, just acknowledging that this is going to be a messy path. It's going to have its ups and its downs along the way. So just expect that and embrace it. And I think the other thing that's come out from me in this process is just the huge amount of compassion and respect that I have for everybody that leans into this work. Everybody that goes through this process has a story and has their own background, their own life events, their own traumas that they're dealing with. And that's what brings this beautiful messiness to this work. And when we can create a space where we can have a huge amount of compassion and empathy for one another in this work, I think that's what helps us to stay committed and to stay true to the intention. And every time I feel like this is difficult, I just sit there and think, wow, this person that I'm talking to right now has been through so much, and just look at what they've been able to achieve in their life and what they're capable of, and the way they still keep showing up every day despite what they've been through. My God, I'm so inspired by this person. This happens so regularly. And I think when we can keep connecting to the humanness of the process and have compassion for others, and also have a huge amount of compassion for ourselves, that's the thing that's going to keep driving us forward in the direction that we want to be going.
So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you saying it is perhaps leaning into really understanding where people are coming from, particularly when maybe they're resisting or pushing back, or they're pushing buttons, or they're being difficult, or whatever it is. Actually leaning into that with compassion and with curiosity and with this awareness that they all carry a story. Putting that human first in any kind of change process, rather than just looking at the numbers and the KPIs.
Absolutely. I think if you put people first, the numbers and the KPIs follow quite naturally. So that's if I was to give one takeaway for people thinking about embarking on this type of journey, acknowledging that it will be messy and it will be tough at times. But if you keep people and the humanness of the process at the heart of it all, that's what will drive you forward.
That's so beautiful. And so wise too. I had a participant the other day who was making the argument that you don't need to be as human, as focused on the human with everyone. Certain people are more deserving of that than others. And I found myself really reacting to that so strongly. And then doing what you just said, trying to lean in and understand where he was coming from. And he had his own story and his own point. But yeah, there's something very reassuring and very hope giving to me about this encouragement to look for the humanness, even when it gets really dark and really messy, because you're going to find your way out through the human path.
Yeah. We're all doing our best on any given day, I think.
Even on our worst days.
Even on our worst days, we're still just doing our best. So yeah, there's something in that.
There's just one last question that I've got that I'm always curious, speaking of wanting to understand the human in front of you. What is the hope for you? What is your hope? What's your highest hope in putting so much of yourself in supporting this organization and these people and doing the work that you're doing?
Every day I think about the incredible people that I'm so grateful to get to work with. And I really want those people to be able to realize their potential and really to see that they're capable of something so much more than what they ever thought that they could do in life, and to enjoy work. I feel even in all the messiness and the difficult times that we encounter, this is like my dream job. I get to just help people fulfill their potential and really see that they're capable of so much more than they ever thought that they could. And for me, that's just such a gift. If I can give that to somebody imagine the ripple effect of that out through their families, the communities that we work in. This is the real gritty work of making the world better.
I feel like I'm going to cry,
Yeah.
which is not, I cry easily. I think it's such an important part of life, but gosh, yes, the gritty work of making the world better. I'm reminded of something one participant shared with us when we did this workshop together a couple of weeks ago, that doing this job changed her life truly deeply because she found purpose and meaning and feels like she's making a real difference. And to me, that is what actualizing your potential looks like. I'm so deeply grateful for your wisdom and your generosity. And in my darker moments, when I lose hope, we can change fast enough to navigate this messy world in a good way and positive way for us collectively. I think of people like you as my hope aspiration, Donna. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you, Alice.
Everything you do.
And you too. I think we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us and guiding us in the wonderful way that you do. Yeah, I think if more people are courageous enough to lean into this work, some pretty amazing things will happen.
I trust that's true. And I bet you'll have some people reaching out to you if you're happy to connect and share. I've already had some people post my LinkedIn post wanting to learn more about how you do this work. So thank you so much for generously inviting us in.
Oh, that's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Alice.
This has been a very inspiring conversation for me. I hope it was for you. I hope it got you thinking about what might be possible if you allow yourself in your workplace or beyond to step into the unknown, to try that thing that maybe hasn't been really tried before, to step into the discomfort of confusion, of the uncertainty, of the constant questioning, am I doing the right thing? And yet do it anyway. Do the thing you believe in. Try a new approach. Challenge some norms. Challenge some of the we've always done it this way statements. And see what is beyond. I was particularly touched by one of these last reflections that Donna left us with around the choice of looking at the people around us at work or perhaps even at home and truly deeply trusting that their potential is way bigger than maybe even they believe it is, and treating people with that mindset, supporting them with the belief that they can be so much more than even they thought they could. And imagine, as Donna invited us, what the ripple effect of that can be throughout our teams, our workplaces, our families, or communities. I agree with her when she says this is the real gritty work of making the world better. And perhaps making the world better does not necessarily require some grand gesture and revolutionary change. It might start with the small things, with that one shift in behavior that you've been meaning to make and haven't quite taken the plunge. So I'm wondering what that is for each of you, and I take that question away for myself as well. Donna's LinkedIn details are in the show notes. As always, I welcome your comments and your thoughts, your experiences, your questions, and I'm sure she'll be open to connecting with you if you reach out. Until next time, stay open, aware, curious, and kind to yourselves and others. Thank you for listening.